Right. We are live right here on X, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble. It is good to see you. Welcome to the Liz Wheeler Show. I'm your host, Liz Wheeler. Another day, another act of leftist violence rocks our nation, this time in the great state of Texas. In Dallas this morning, a young man opened fire, a sniper opened fire, I should say, from the roof of a building. He targeted an ICE facility in Dallas, Texas. He killed 2 ICE detainees and critically wounded perhaps a third. This young man opened fire from the roof of an immigration lawyer's office, which may have been the first clue that this was an act of violence committed by a leftist. We now know that the young man's name was Joshua John, a 29-year-old man. The left, of course, was very quick to say, we don't know if this was a leftist. Maybe this was a right-winger, because why would you kill 2 ICE detainees unless you hated immigrants? Before they had any facts, they were trying to paint you as guilty for this crime. But of course, that propaganda that the left is disseminating turned out to be, like their propaganda always is, grossly false. Joshua John had engraved on the bullet casings, this according to law enforcement, anti-ICE. That's the phrase. Anti-ICE is what he engraved on the bullet casings that he fired from his firearm on the top of that immigration lawyer's office. Laura Loomer did a deep dive background check on him and his Facebook profile picture. His Facebook has now been scrubbed from the web, but his Facebook profile picture, which she grabbed a screenshot of before Facebook removed his profile, shows a picture of a man with a communist hammer and sickle. It's not exactly something a right-winger would post on their Facebook, now is it? Now, Laura Loomer in this report says that his profile picture contained communist and Antifa imagery, suggesting that he was a member of Antifa. We have not been able to independently verify whether Joshua John, the Dallas ICE sniper, was a member of Antifa or not. That, I'm sure, that information will become public if it is known as it's known throughout the course of today, as we're looking deeper into this man's background, his ideological motivations, his associations, groups that he was a part of, who he's associated with. What is clear already, though, regardless of whether he was a member of an Antifa organization or not, what's clear is that the tactic, the terrorism tactic that he engaged in, assassinating ICE detainees, attacking an ICE facility, is a specific tactic of terrorism that has been called for by Antifa organizations. This is very important for the show today, because we have been hearing over the course of the past days a narrative that you may have overlooked. You've heard it. You've heard it probably dozens of times by now. This narrative goes like this. Antifa is not a group. Antifa is a decentralized network. They don't have a leadership structure. They don't have a national branch or headquarters, if you will. They're just they're the wind. They're a shadow. They're a decentralized grassroots network. That's all they are. And today on the Liz Wheeler Show, I want to establish once and for all that this is false. And it's not only false, it's critically important to the left that you believe the narrative that Antifa is a decentralized network with no central funding sources. It's critically important that you believe that lie, because there is a group, a network of radical leftist organizations, you can call them front groups, that serve as front groups for the sustenance, the financial sustenance, and the training of Antifa members. So let's back up here for a second. Mike Benz has exposed a website of Antifa, a specific Antifa organization with a website, admitting that they are not a decentralized network, even though this is what you hear on X, this is what you hear from cable news, this is what you hear from all of the mainstream media. They're a decentralized network. How can President Trump designate them as a terror organization? They're not a thing. They're just a decentralized group. Well, Mike Benz exposes the truth. A website of Antifa admits that they are a coordinated movement with funding, institutional top-down funding. This Antifa website issued a response to President Trump designating Antifa as a terror organization. In this response, this is what the title of this piece is. It says, make ready, safeguarding our movements against repression, how to respond to Donald Trump's threats. The date on this response is the 18th of September, 2025. This is what it reads. It says, it remains to be seen, this is Antifa writing, how seriously the administration will carry out Trump's threats. Let's stop right there for a moment. That in and of itself is a critically important sentence. A critically important sentence for the Trump administration to hear and to understand that words designating Antifa as a terror organization are not enough. That Antifa at this moment is waiting to see whether they've called President Trump on a bluff or whether he will follow through on his designation. If he does not, it will embolden this violent cohort. They say it remains to be seen how seriously the administration will carry out Trump's threats and whether they will start by attacking grassroots groups or proceed from the top down, targeting massive liberal institutions and fundraising platforms. Oh, but I thought that they didn't have a top. How could the Trump administration proceed from the top down if Antifa is a decentralized network and they don't have a headquarters and a hierarchy and a structure? If they don't have a top and a bottom, how could Trump start from the top? Well, that's the thing, of course. That narrative that says that Antifa is a decentralized structure is a lie. Antifa continues by saying, in either case, our long-term prospects will depend on whether we can enable large numbers of people to act in solidarity with each other. So what Antifa is saying in this response to President Trump designating Antifa as a terror organization is that they will be existentially threatened if President Trump proceeds in a top-down approach, if he cuts off their institutional funding. We knew it was a lie, and it's important to establish that it wasn't just a lie for the sake of lying. Okay, now that brings us back to the ICE attack today in Dallas, Texas. This young man, Joshua John, we don't know whether he was officially a member of Antifa, whether he just embraced communist ideology, whether he was inspired by Antifa propaganda. What we know is he engaged in the terror tactic that Antifa has specifically called for. In this same response, on this same Antifa website that Mike Benz exposed, this is one of the points of action that Antifa calls for from their members, from their followers. It says, quote, create no-go zones for federal forces. If ICE agents hesitate to enter certain areas without backing from police, National Guard, and Marines, that will limit their operations. The more resources they have to commit to every raid, the fewer attacks they will be able to carry out and the more expensive their power grab will be. This young man, this leftist who murdered 2 people at an ICE facility today, who had a communist hammer and sickle as his profile picture on Facebook, who engraved anti-ICE on the bullet casings that he fired, was engaging in a terror tactic that was specifically called for by Antifa. Again, it is hugely important to understand that the tactic, it's hugely important to understand that it is a critical tactic of Antifa to propagate the narrative that they are decentralized like the wind. Because the truth is, the network of radical leftist groups that we know are fomenting violence and training revolutionaries in our country right now, whether this is Black Lives Matter, whether this is Armed Queers Salt Lake City, or whomever, there's a whole laundry list of them, Students for Justice in Palestine, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, all of them, they're the network that by association is supporting and training Antifa and their causes. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to establish 2 things. The first of which is a question. The question is, was Charlie Kirk's assassin connected to this network of violent radical leftist groups? And to answer this question, we're going to bring up a story from NBC. NBC claims the answer to that question is no. This is the headline. No evidence found yet of ties between Charlie Kirk's shooting and left-wing groups, officials say. This report from NBC News is being echoed around the leftist echo chamber, particularly by Raw Story. Their headline went viral when they posted and said that the FBI is coming up empty with in their investigation between any connection between Charlie Kirk's assassin and these radical left-wing groups. Well, I want to establish something. I can exclusively tell you that this is false. My sources in the United States government tell me that this report from NBC is not true. It is false to state that the FBI has failed to establish a connection between radical leftist groups and Charlie Kirk's assassin. Now, of course, the natural question following that establishment of truth is, okay, what is the connection between Charlie Kirk's assassin and radical left-wing groups? And that, of course, is where this entire investigation becomes tricky. We are in the midst of what I would describe as a dynamic investigation. That means it's ongoing. It's happening as we speak before our very eyes. New information is being uncovered minute by minute, which sometimes radically changes the equation of what we know. But here's what we know. It's easy to see that the leftist violence in our country, whether this is Charlie Kirk's assassination, whether this is the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020, whether this is Antifa, whether it's the anti-ICE riots out in LA earlier this year, it is easy to see that leftist violence in our nation is not grassroots. It's not organic. It's not a coalition of individuals who happen to share a grievance against our government who are just turning out and they happen to find each other on the streets. It's easy to see that that's not true. What we are seeing, this coordinated leftist violence, requires resources and funding. That type of mobilization and action just isn't possible on the grassroots level. And honestly, all it takes is a little common sense to see this. You cannot stage events the way the left is staging riots without some kind of centralized organization. That part's obvious. Doesn't take a rocket science or a detective to figure that out. It just takes believing what's in front of your eyes. The trickier part of this is piecing together the associations between these groups. You can picture the shell game when the left has deliberately tried to obfuscate the connections. So no, we don't have the specific answer yet of what is the connection between Charlie Kirk's assassin and the radical left-wing groups. What we do know is that NBC is lying about what the FBI knows. All that being said, we are going to report today on a connection that if I were FBI leadership, this is where I'd be looking. And who knows? Perhaps this is what the FBI is looking into at this very moment. So let's untangle this together. And of course, all of this at the end of the day is tied together. Let's travel back to July of 2025. In the state of Texas, in the city of Alvarado, Texas, on July 4th, there was another shooting at another ICE facility. Remember, this perhaps shouldn't surprise us because shooting at ICE agents, especially at ICE facilities, is a specific tactic that Antifa calls for. Now, the shooting at the ICE facility in Alvarado, Texas, was carried out by a man named Benjamin Hanil Song. It's a 32-year-old man. He was the lead shooter at the ICE facility in Alvarado, Texas. Now, Benjamin Song is a member of a group called the Socialist Rifle Association. You're going to want to remember that name, the Socialist Rifle Association. Benjamin Song is also a member of the John Brown Gun Club. There's going to be a few names here to keep track of, but once you understand who's behind these groups, it'll all come together. Now, the woman who helped Benjamin Song, the July ICE shooter, helped him evade capture. This woman's name was Lynette Reed Sharp. She is also a member of the John Brown Gun Club. But let's start with the Socialist Rifle Association. of which Benjamin Song was a member. The Socialist Rifle Association, who is this group? This is actually quite a large group for as obscure as you might think socialists and firearms. This group boasts 10,000 members across our country. They are specifically not just socialist, they are specifically communist in their ideology. The goal of the group is not just Second Amendment rights and to arm yourself against tyranny by the government. The goal of this group, the purpose of this group, is to overthrow the ruling class, which they define not just in economic terms, but in the cultural terms that we've become used to. White men are the oppressors. All men are the oppressors. Christians are the oppressors. That is the cultural beliefs of the Socialist Rifle Association. One of the things that they have posted and stated before is, quote, any attempt to disarm workers must be frustrated by force if necessary. So this is not a peaceful group calling for peaceful exercise of their constitutional rights, not in the least. One of the missions of this group is, quote, to defend against fascists and Nazis. The logo of the Socialist Rifle Association is the trans flag with an assault rifle. And of course, if you look at their national leadership, 4 out of the 13 of their national leaders go by they, them pronouns. So this is not just communist economically. This is the cultural communism, the transgender ideology, the critical race theory, the anti-Americanism that we have seen rearing its ugly head in our country and in our institutions. Now, years ago on Reddit, the Socialist Rifle Association, this group lied about Charlie Kirk specifically. They said something horrendous about him. They falsely stated that Charlie Kirk had called for the lynching of transgender people. In the years following this, the Socialist Rifle Association has been tied to many violent crimes in our nation, including the Tesla dealership bombings that we've seen in the past year. Bet you didn't know that the Socialist Rifle Association was involved in that. This, of course, came before the July 4th ICE attack in Alvarado, Texas. Now, the Socialist Rifle Association is probably best described as a front group. A front group for what? Well, their associations, the people they hang out with, the people they collab with, reveal to us what the left attempts to conceal. Their connection to both Antifa and to Roy Singham. So let's go through a few of the associations of the Socialist Rifle Association. They do have overlap with Antifa. Ideologically, on their own website, in their own literature, they claim to stand for, quote, anti-fascist values. That is, of course, what Antifa is supposed to stand for. But it's more than that. The association between Antifa and the Socialist Rifle Association includes members of the Socialist Rifle Association at events with Antifa Black Bloc protesters. You know what they look like. Now, that's no coincidence, because you don't just pal around with Antifa Black Bloc protesters unless you're one of them, unless you share a cause, unless you've been mobilized together, unless you're there as a team. That's not all. It's not just an association between Antifa and the Socialist Rifle Association. The Socialist Rifle Association is also associated with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. You remember the Party of Socialism and Liberation is a communist group, a communist political party here in the United States funded by Roy Singham. Yes, Roy Singham, the communist billionaire. He's technically an American citizen, but he's currently hiding out in communist China. He lives in Shanghai. He shares an office with a Chinese Communist Party propaganda firm, and he funnels his money into violent riots and protests to destabilize the United States. He's behind many of the violent events that we have seen in recent decades, recent years, recent months, recent weeks in the United States. We'll get to that in a second. The Socialist Rifle Association has worked hand in hand with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. For example, in 2018, they staged a joint relief effort in the wake of Hurricane Michael. Now, again, you might say, well, a relief effort for Hurricane Michael, that doesn't sound too nefarious. You don't exactly stage a joint relief effort with a communist party unless you are associated with their ideology and you are acquainted with their leadership. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. In St. George, Utah, that's the city where Charlie Kirk's assassin, Tyler Robinson, lived with his transgender boyfriend, Lance Twiggs. In St. George, Utah, there's a chapter of the Socialist Rifle Association. And the Socialist Rifle Association was asked by the Daily Wire if Tyler Robinson was a member of their group. They said he was not. But then, when the Socialist Rifle Association was asked, was Tyler Robinson's transgender boyfriend, Lance Twiggs, a member of your group? They refused to confirm or deny that, citing their confidentiality policy. Why would they answer and deny that Tyler Robinson was a member of their group, but then refuse to confirm or deny whether Lance Twiggs is a member of their group? Again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes. All it takes is a little common sense. If I'm the FBI, the leadership at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that's where I'm looking. I'm looking at Lance Twiggs. I'm looking at the Socialist Rifle Association and specifically at their chapter in St. George, Utah. Now let's back up just for a moment. Let's go back to Alvarado, Texas on July 4th, when a member of the Socialist Rifle Association attacked the ICE facility. He wasn't just a member of the Socialist Rifle Association. He was also a member of a group called the John Brown Gun Club. And the woman who helped him evade authorities was also a member of the John Brown Gun Club. Now, the John Brown Gun Club is tied to the group that we exposed last week, Armed Queers Salt Lake City, the group that shut down their social media presence almost immediately after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. The group that the FBI confirmed they are investigating to see if this group had any foreknowledge of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, since there were many people in that area who seemed at least tangentially associated with the group who had signaled on social media in the days and weeks leading up to Charlie Kirk's event in Utah that something big was going to happen on that day. The John Brown Gun Club is tied to Armed Queers Salt Lake City. They ran a joint workshop once that involved the leader of Armed Queers, Maya Fanayan, the man who now identifies as a woman who leads that particular group. Now, investigative reporter Andy No, who is an expert in Antifa, says the John Brown Gun Club is Antifa for all intents and purposes, an extreme far-left militia. This is a lot of information. I promise it all ties together. Going back just a couple of days to last week, President Trump designates Antifa as a terrorist organization. What does this mean? Well, what it should mean is the dismantling of all of these radical groups that we mentioned, and here's why. Before we get to that, I want to address the pushback here. Does President Trump, this is coming from both sides of the aisle, does President Trump have the authority to designate a domestic group like Antifa as a terrorist group? Usually when a president designates a group as a terrorist group, he's actually designating them as a foreign terrorist organization. There are people who are arguing that President Trump doesn't have the legal authority to designate a domestic group as a terrorist group. These people are wrong. They're wrong for a couple of reasons. First of all, the two questions that you would ask when you are analyzing whether a group in the United States is a domestic group or whether they are a foreign group is, where is it based? Is it based here or is it based abroad? And who funds it? Is that funding coming from domestic sources or is that funding coming from abroad? Okay, so let's quickly analyze Antifa and answer these questions. Antifa as an organization was not started in the United States. The origin of Antifa was from the 1920s, the 1930s. It originated in Europe, in Germany, and in Italy specifically. For example, in 1932, in Germany, the German Communist Party, in response to the rise of the Nazi Party, founded Antifa. This is 100 years old. This is not something that emanated from modern American politics. In fact, the United States-based branches of Antifa or chapters of Antifa aren't particularly new either. There was a revitalization or an establishment of Antifa here in the United States all the way back in 1987 in Minneapolis. The Anti-Racist Action group resurrected Antifa here in the United States, but the origin of Antifa was never here domestically in our country. All that being said, here's the thing. It actually doesn't matter. You can arrest any person who is engaging in terrorist activities, regardless of where the origin of their group is. It's also against the law to call for the violent overthrow of the United States, which these groups do. You could also make the argument that Antifa is not a domestic group because they operate all around the world and they weren't even founded here. There are just chapters that exist here. I think all of those arguments are strong arguments, but they're not even the strongest argument of them all. The bulletproof argument against Antifa and the bulletproof argument in favor, substantiating President Trump's authority to designate Antifa as a terror organization, is that Roy Singham is funding the shell groups, the front groups that provide cover and resources and training for Antifa. And Roy Singham is operating as an agent of the Chinese Communist Party. It is inarguable that Roy Singham is funding violence in the United States. We know this. We've established this. We've been talking about this for months now. Roy Singham is behind the violent anti-ICE riots that happened out in Los Angeles, where protesters wearing pro-Hamas keffiyehs poured gasoline on the engines of cars and lit them on fire, threw rocks at police, broke glass windows on law enforcement precincts. These were not peaceful protests. These were organized, coordinated, funded, violent riots, and Roy Singham's money was behind them because these anti-ICE riots were organized by the Party of Socialism and Liberation, which is funded by Roy Singham and his network of NGOs. Roy Singham's money is also behind the violent pro-Hamas, anti-Israel riots that we saw specifically on college campuses all across the country. Roy Singham funds the groups Students for Justice in Palestine, which are the groups that usually host these events that lead to the violent campus riots. His money was behind the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020, which we didn't even realize at the time. We didn't realize that the funding went beyond the openly Marxist founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. But he's always there. Roy Singham's money, his pocketbook, his checkbook is always there behind leftist violence. And it makes sense when you understand why he lives in China and how the Chinese Communist Party, what their plan is to destabilize the United States. We're going to get to that in 1 second. Today's episode is sponsored by All Family Pharmacy. Are you tired of the doctors telling you no, you can't get prescriptions for affordable off-patent medications, or insurance won't cover what actually works for you? Well, if I've described you, you're not alone. Millions of Americans are frustrated with our healthcare system because it's not broken, it's corrupt. All Family Pharmacy is your alternative. They are a patient-first, independent pharmacy. They connect you with licensed U.S. doctors who approve your prescriptions online fast and legally. So there's no gatekeeping, no insurance middlemen, no red tape. They offer affordable, high-demand medications that are often hard to access, like ivermectin, for example. Ivermectin starts at just $2 at All Family Pharmacy. Medbendazole, hydroxychloroquine, antibiotics, NAD, you name it, they have it. Over 200 different medication options. You order online, it takes just minutes. A licensed doctor then reviews and approves your prescription. The medication ships straight to your door. No clinic visit, no hassle. Everything is secure, HIPAA compliant, and pharmacist reviewed. You choose the medication, not an insurance company or an indoctrinated physician. Real healthcare freedom means you decide what's right for your body. Visit allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, code Liz10. Okay, a lot of names and a lot of groups, and we're about to tie them all together. When you understand exactly what the Chinese Communist Party's plan is to destabilize the United States from within and the role that Roy Singham plays in that plan, suddenly this shell game of radical leftist organizations that are all serve the purpose of hiding Antifa, while the propaganda acts as this protective layer. Antifa is a decentralized network. They're not real. They're the wind. They're a shadow. How can they have funding from the top down if they're just chapters? They're not an actual organized group. It all begins to make sense when we untangle the plot against the United States. So let's start with Roy Singham funding the Party for Socialism and Liberation. This, of course, Party for Socialism and Liberation is the same group that organized and mobilized the anti-ICE riots. They are a Marxist-Leninist organization. They run political candidates even in this country. One of their specialties is organizing what they call protests, more accurately described as riots. This is an organization that is directly tied to Roy Singham, receiving money from his nonprofits for events and operations. The Party for Socialism and Liberation was actively involved in the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots, obviously the anti-ICE riots. Here's the thing. The militant wing of the Party for Socialism and Liberation trains with Antifa. Trains Antifa in weapons and self-defense. You'll remember from our expose last week, Maya Fanayan, who is the transgender leader, biological male who identifies as woman, the leader of Armed Queer Salt Lake City, is also an organizer for the Party of Socialism and Liberation. The militant wing of the Party for Socialism and Liberation trains with Antifa in weapons and self-defense. That's just one connection. Roy Singham has also donated over $20 million to a group called the People's Forum. He is essentially the lifeblood of the People's Forum. They sort of claim to be independent, but all the money coming to them is from Roy Singham. Now, the People's Forum stages events, workshops, training for Antifa. Now, it's not necessarily advertised as this is a training event for Antifa, but when the People's Forum hosts these workshops, the attendees are Antifa. Because these workshops are focused on quote unquote anti-fascist organizing. So they quite literally are marketing to Antifa. That's not all. Roy Singham is married to a woman named Jody Evans. Jody Evans is the co-founder of Code Pink, which is ostensibly, they brand themselves as an anti-war organization, although that's not really true. That's just what their marketing brochures are. I've said this before on the show. You've probably seen Code Pink if you've seen those angry topless feminists that march in Europe. That's Jody Evans's group. That's the group. Well, Code Pink, since Jody Evans married Roy Singham a few years ago, a huge amount of their funding comes from Roy Singham and his network of NGOs. About 25% of Code Pink's funding every year comes from her husband. Code Pink itself has joined forces with Antifa for protests, specifically anti-Israel protests. And when I say joined forces with Antifa, I don't just mean they both show up at the same place at the same time, although even if they did, that seems to be more than a coincidence. No. Code Pink and Antifa share resources and platforms. They also, of course, coordinate with the Party of Socialism and Liberation and the People's Forum, which, of course, have their own Antifa associations. That's not all. There's another Roy Singham-funded group called the Unity of Fields. It's actually a breakoff group of the Party of Socialism and Liberation. And Unity of Fields, the purpose of this group is weapons training and self-defense classes that are, again, targeted towards Antifa members. Now, the FBI has documented these training practices because guess who else is associated in the Unity of Fields weapons training? The Socialist Rifle Association and Armed Queers. Oh, what a tangled web this is. That's intended to deceive us, but when you follow the money, it leads you to the truth. That's not all. Roy Singham has also donated to the Democrat Socialists of America and to Black Lives Matter. We established that he was associated with Black Lives Matter already. But the Democrat Socialist of America has trained with Antifa. In 2020, the Democrat Socialists of America trained with Antifa during the Black Lives Matter riot, which is, it's hard to believe that all of this is true. In addition to the fact, we established this again on last week's show when we talked about armed queers taking the trip to Cuba, which was organized by an organization that's funded by Roy Singham NGOs. This is a common practice for Roy Singham. It is how they train revolutionaries. So what does this mean? How do you organize all of this information? Well, let's start with what we know. Roy Singham is inarguably funding violence in the United States. He is inarguably behind the anti-ICE riots in LA, behind much of the Black Lives Matter protests, behind the Party for Socialism and Liberation, behind the Students for Justice in Palestine and some of these violent pro-Hamas riots that we saw on college campus. He's funding this network of radical groups. And this network of radical groups are but a front intended to feed and train Antifa, feed them with resources and train them in tactics. So that the propaganda that Antifa is just a decentralized network. How can you declare them to be a terror organization if they're just a grassroots movement? So that they can exist in that vacuum of truth as long as possible. Roy Singham, though, is acting as an agent of the Chinese Communist Party. He shares an office in Shanghai with a Chinese Communist Party propaganda firm. He was spotted at a Chinese Communist Party propaganda conference writing in a notebook, a red notebook with a communist hammer and sickle on it. Roy Singham, this is not new information. When Roy Singham resided in the United States all the way back in the 1970s, he was investigated by the FBI because he was part of a communist group. He was investigated as a subversive in the United States. He is openly Leninist, openly Marxist, openly communist. An agent of a hostile communist foreign adversary paying groups that train Antifa to domestically destabilize us here in the United States. That is not legal. Is Antifa a decentralized group? No, they're not. They obfuscate their organizational structure with a tangled web of associations, other radical leftist groups that receive funding through NGOs, most of which funnel money from Roy Singham. It's clear that this narrative that we hear, that we've heard so many times in the course of the past week since President Trump designated Antifa as a terror group, it's clear that this narrative is not true. These are well-funded networks, and if you don't want to simply follow the money, believe Antifa when they admit it themselves on their website. They're waiting to see if President Trump's going to follow through on what he said. They're waiting to see whether he's going to target them at the chapter level or whether he's going to take an institutional top-down approach. How could he take an institutional top-down approach if there is no institutional top, if there's no hierarchy, no organization, if they're a decentralized network? Well, that wouldn't work unless they actually are. Roy Singham acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party means that, of course, President Trump has the authority to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization because they're not really a domestic group if they're doing the work of a foreign adversary and receiving money from a man who is operating hand in glove with the Chinese communists. Thank goodness at least some in the United States Congress recognize this threat to national security. It's not just a potential threat, it's happening under our very noses. And they're calling on the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, to do something about it. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna wrote, and James Comer, he's the chair of the Oversight Committee, wrote the following letter to Treasury Secretary Bessent. Dear Secretary Bessent, they wrote, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is investigating Chinese Communist Party efforts to sow discord in the United States and is conducting oversight over the U.S. government's ability and efforts under existing law to combat such efforts. They go on to say, reportedly, Mr. Singham, a U.S. citizen with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, has been funding and supporting various extremist entities in the United States with the aim of causing destruction and division in our country. They go on to say, according to the New York Times, Mr. Singham, who resides in the People's Republic of China, has a long track record of assisting far-left entities, such as Code Pink, that oppose U.S. interests and support U.S. adversaries. He's created an elaborate dark money network which allows him to send funds to a series of nonprofits, such as the United Community Front and Justice Education Fund, that have almost no real footprints. Nonprofit filings show that nearly $1.8 million flowed from these nonprofits to Chinese media company Maku Group. Maku's website shows young people gathering in Mr. Singham's office facing a banner that reads, "Always follow the party," with an image of General Secretary Xi Jinping in the background. In 2019, Mr. Singham started a consulting business with Chinese partners active in the propaganda apparatus of the Chinese Communist Party. These reports, the Oversight Committee goes on, suggest that Mr. Singham may have acted as an agent for the Chinese Communist Party. Under General Secretary Xi, the CCP is known for its, quote, strategy of sowing discord, which refers to efforts to make internal disputes amongst the enemy, that would be us here in the United States, so deep that they become distracted from conflict. If Mr. Singham is carrying out this strategy on behalf of the CCP, he may have unfulfilled Foreign Agent Registration Act registration obligations. FARA's purpose is to protect the national defense, internal security, and foreign relations of the United States by requiring public disclosure by persons engaging in propaganda activities for or on behalf of foreign governments, foreign political parties, and other foreign principals. They go on to say Mr. Singham has expanded his network to include not only far-left pro-CCP entities, but also radical anti-Semitic entities. They say the committee wrote to Mr. Singham in June requesting his cooperation with our investigation by providing documents and communications related to these matters. To date, he has ignored the committee's request. We therefore request that the Treasury immediately undertake a formal evaluation to determine the applicability of any relevant sanctions and any other civil remedies or criminal penalties for Mr. Singham's assets and the assets of entities he controls or funds, including whether to freeze or seize such assets. Such an evaluation should include, in addition to Mr. Singham's directly controlled assets, the following entities alleged to have ties with Mr. Singham. And this list of organizations includes the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Code Pink, No Cold War, Tricontinental, which is a so-called think tank which employs Roy Singham's son, United Community Fund, Justice and Education Fund, the People's Support Foundation, New Fame, People's Forum, Dongshang News, Shut It Down for Palestine, the Answer Coalition, the International People's Assembly, Al-Awada, New York, National Students for Justice in Palestine, the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Palestinian American Community Center, New Jersey, Samadun, and Breakthrough Media. Just the sheer volume of names on that list shows you how intricate this web of radical leftist organizations funded by Roy Singham that are serving the express purpose of doing the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party, which is to sow discord in the United States by organizing, mobilizing, and funding domestic violence. And yet we're told by the mainstream media that Antifa is not really a terrorist organization because they're a decentralized network. They have no organizational structure, no hierarchy. They're not really a thing. They're the wind. They're a shadow. It's a lie. It's a lie intended to obfuscate the truth. Yesterday at the United Nations, President Trump's teleprompter broke. Before his teleprompter broke, when he was entering the building, he got on the escalator, and as soon as he stepped on the escalator stopped. I think we have a video of this. He steps onto the elevator, and as soon as the First Lady and the President step on the elevator, or the escalator, I should say, the escalator stops. And what does the Secret Service do? The Secret Service does exactly nothing. They don't cover for the president. They don't shield him. They don't remove him from the escalator. They stand there like incompetent blobs until the escalator goes back on. In this day and age, when the president has been the target of an assassination attempt not once but twice, less than, 2 weeks to the day after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, this is unacceptable. And nor is it a coincidence that this happened. This wasn't simply a technological glitch, nor was the error of the teleprompter not working the moment President Trump took the stage. Take a look at the president calling out the United States or the United Nations for these events.
I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations: a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much. I ended 7 wars.
Now, here's the thing. It wasn't a coincidence that the teleprompter stopped working. It wasn't a coincidence that the escalator stopped the moment the president stepped onto it. But maybe this is the benefit of this. Whoever was operating the teleprompter was trying to disrupt President Trump's planned 15 minutes of speaking at the United Nations. But because of what they did, disrupting the teleprompter and ruining President Trump's planned remarks, instead, he went on a 55-minute, not 15-minute, 55-minute rant against the United Nations. Never underestimate the contemporaneous genius of this man. His ability to recall details of UN corruption is simply unparalleled. And let's make this very clear. As if we needed any other evidence of the utter corruption and hatred at the root of the United Nations, do we all see this now? That the United Nations no longer serves whatever purpose people claim that was once so necessary in our world? We will be allies with countries that we need to be allies with. We do not need the United Nations for that. Defund them. The United Nations has for too long taken advantage of us, our money, funding abortion, transgender ideology, critical race theory, climate change all around the world. The World Health Organization, which is just a patsy of the Chinese Communist Party. For too long, they have engaged in corruption using our money to do it. And now, thanks to whoever pulled the escalator trick and whoever refused to run the teleprompter, now President Trump knows the depth of their hatred. Sometimes it takes the pettiness of the enemy to actually make it hit home how much they hate you. Defund the UN. Neither the escalator nor the teleprompter were a coincidence. Neither of them. President Trump, by the way, unveiled outside the White House a new addition to the campus. The Hall of Fame of the Presidents was unveiled today, and it's beautiful. Honestly, it's exactly what I would expect from President Trump. He has impeccable taste when it comes to construction and to staging. It's something that displays the history of the United States, the reality of what we've faced. And if we could play this video, Spence, of the new Wall of Fame of Presidents, look at that. How many times have we seen media figures, go ahead and play this, walking with the presidents? You can see Carter, you can see Reagan, you can see H.W. Bush, you can see Bill Clinton framed in this beautiful ornate gold frame. Former President George W. Bush, Barack Obama, President Trump during his first term in 2016. And then you get to the next president, Joe Biden, and the photo in the portrait frame is an auto pen. Before you get to President Trump 2024, this is not a meme, my friends. This is not fake. This is real. And if this is not, it's not just a troll. This is not President Trump being petty. This is not him being unpresidential or undignified. This is a reminder to the American people, just like his nicknames, Crooked Hillary. He could call her that name, and in that one word that he added to her name, it brought to our minds exactly what she had done, that she had used her position in government to sell access to the federal government to profit her husband. She was corrupt. She hid a private email server in a bathroom closet in New York and then lied about it. In that one tiny little phrase, President Trump brought to everyone's mind the depth of corruption of Hillary Clinton, and none of us liked it. Not Republicans, not Democrats. And that's what President Trump is doing in the Presidential Hall of Fame. That one picture, sure, it's a funny troll. It's hilarious, actually. We're going to probably have to award to President Trump a meme of the year, and there have been a lot of good ones this year. But that's not the purpose of what President Trump was doing. The purpose of putting Joe Biden's auto pen as his presidential portrait is to remind the American people of what the Democrats did to us. That they stole the 2020 election through electioneering, thanks to Mark Elias and his apparatus. That they lied to us. And then once Joe Biden got into office, obviously senile, obviously unable to perform the duties of the chief executive, they used an auto pen. His staff, the shadow government, did what they wanted to do and forged Joe Biden's signature. And nobody, not Democrats, not Republicans, not independents, nobody thinks that's fair or just. And that one photo, the auto pen portrait, reminds everyone of the depth of corruption of the Democrat Party. Listen, I want to take a moment to thank you all for watching and listening to this show today and every day. It's because of you that we are able to keep doing this, to do investigative work and synthesize reports and complicated topics so that everyone in the country understands the enemy that we are facing. Blaze TV exists because people like you refuse to fall for propaganda or to settle for clickbait headlines that mislead instead of informed. And our efforts here at Blaze have never been about one voice or one company. It is about a movement of people, you and I together, who refuse to sit on the sidelines and are instead willing to take a stand. That's why Blaze TV matters. By subscribing, you are part of what we're doing. We are doing this together, standing shoulder to shoulder, because we believe America's worth fighting for. And we understand that in order to defeat this enemy we face, we have to understand the reality of who they are. So please, if you haven't already, join us at blazetv.com/Liz. You can get $20 off right now for as low as $8 a month on the annual plan. You can be a part of what we do every day, shaping the future of our country. That's blazetv.com/Liz. blazetv.com/Liz. I want to thank everybody who logged on and is sitting with us today. If you're not already subscribed to the show, go to youtube.com/Liz Wheeler. Go to x.com/Liz_Wheeler. Head over to Spotify. We have video on Spotify now, which I've been very excited about for a couple of months. If you're not subscribed over there, please do and leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.